So we are live for another episode of Sutras and Sutras, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, making them real and pertinent to our everyday lives. I am going to reassure the folks who watch the first 3 episodes that it does get better to multicast. And I'm wondering if I am currently multicasting across three platforms, but we'll see. There has been a little bit of a sticky issue with Instagram the past few times that I did this. So the last episode that we did with this, there was a themed yoga class on the second sutra, a little thread of wisdom from Patanjali in his first book, which translated into English is the definition of yoga, which is the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. That is one of the closest translations that is applicable. And this fluctuations of the mind is translated as chitta. So here is a really important key point that in yoga philosophy, this chitta is divided into 3 parts. And one part is manas, which is our subconscious mind, things that we may not be aware of, that our life experience, childhood, maybe if you believe in previous lives, things that are subconscious and deeply rooted, but we don't consciously know they're there. That's manas. The second one is buddhi, which is the intellectual mind, the part of my mind that helped me figure out Caster, one of the softwares a software to multi-stream that I needed to use Yellow Duck to connect Instagram and OBS for it all to work on an Apple laptop. That's my intellectual mind that did that. And another part, and it's the tricky part, is called ahamkara. And it's loosely what we in the West would call ego. And it has a tricky way of sneaking into the yoga person's world, yoga person's mind. So, or the person who is seeking self-realization, more self-awareness, and a connection to spirit. Our ego uses that to get its way because the ego always wants to be in control. So that is ahamkara. Again, I'm just going to reiterate here that I am not a Sanskrit specialist. So if I butcher any of these words, please forgive me. I am getting better. But in order to honor the legacy and history of yoga that comes from India, it is important that I use the Sanskrit words. Okay, so before I continue with these 3 little first of all, ahamkara, the ego that is like, ooh, I'm going to use their spirituality against them. Hang in there. This is a sticky point for yoga folks, myself included. If you want to follow us on Instagram, our tag is @WestchesterYoga, and our website is wyoga.online. So instead of .com, it is wyoga.online. Okay, so making this real, all right, and the tricks that our minds play with us as yoga people. Now, say I'm a yoga teacher, I teach a class, and someone comes after the class and says, I am having a problem with this, whatever it is. Maybe it's psychological, maybe it's physical, maybe it's a mix of both. And I, as the yoga teacher, think, oh, yes, I'm well trained and I have my 500 hour. So for those of you who don't know, the 200 hour RYT 200 is the foundational course, and the 300 hour is the 300 hour course. Sorry about that. The 300 hour course is the advanced certification, and the 2 and the 300 together make 500, which is the advanced certification for Yoga Alliance, which is a globally recognized entity. So I'm a teacher, 500 hour, and I'm like, oh yes, and this part of the body is associated with this chakra, and this asana, this yoga pose will help with the blah, 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 blah. And so here goes. The ego, all right, ahamkara, comes in and says, ooh, yes, I'm in control. I know what's going on, and I'm in control here. And I have a 500 hour, and the ego convinces the intellectual mind, yes, that's right, you do have the 500 hour. Yes, that is what you did learn in your trainings. Yes, that was a lot of hours. So yes, indeed, that is true. So the ego ropes in the intellectual mind, and then the subconscious mind, the manas, is like, well, you know, I never felt important when I was younger, and this is going to make me feel important. So, and when I was, you know, I feel like I have to fix people all the time. So this is my role. And so the ego ropes in the intellectual and the subconscious, and the yoga teacher tries to fix the student. Yoga teachers are yoga teachers. They are not medical doctors. They are not psychiatrists. They are not psychologists. Yoga with all of this can help. Yes, yoga can help on our healing journey, and it absolutely has helped me, which is why I'm absolutely convinced that dedicated to this practice, lifelong practice, and I've seen it help with many people. However, the yoga teacher, before saying anything, I am not a medical doctor. I am not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. In yoga philosophy and yoga learning, this is what I can tell you. However, please go see your professional. That is humility, and that is checking out of our ego. I'll give you another example just to make it real. Well, and yoga folks, if you're listening, this may ring some bells. There is some contention in the yoga world between yoga franchises and yoga ashrams and small yoga places. And some people think one is better or the other. That kind of thinking actually isn't very yogic, but in any case, it is there. It exists, right? And here's why. Because our ego likes to be right. Our ego likes to be better than. So, suppose a franchise hires a very highly certified yoga teacher. And this yoga teacher starts working at this franchise and thinks that they are the most qualified yoga teacher at this franchise, this studio, and they are better than perhaps the franchise owner who just purchased the franchise and plans to get certified later. They think they're better than other teachers, and they kind of let that information, that thought process seep through to the students, and they have this impression that they are better than because perhaps they are an ERYT 500, which means extraordinary 500-hour teacher. Perhaps they've been to India many times. Perhaps whatever it is, the ego says to the intellectual mind, you should be running this place. You should have your own place. You're better than, because the ego loves that. The intellectual mind goes, it's true. You do have a 500, the E4 500. Yes, you did go to, yes, yeah, that does make sense. And then this the subconscious mind, who wants to be loved and accepted and respected and venerated, thinks that being better than is something that will make the soul feel better. So the ego ropes that in as well. So following up on that particular example, suppose this yoga teacher starts saying things that are negative about the studio to the students. And the students kind of liked the feel-good vibe in the studio, but now their teacher, who they loved, is now saying, who they love and trust, is now saying negative things about other teachers and about the studio itself, and kind of like inviting them out to be friends, and then kind of, as they say in Jamaica, sissing about other people. By the way, Narada, which is another set of sutras, says that gossiping is something that we should always stay far away from. So, but that will be for another series, not this one. We're still on Book 1, Sutra 2, and Chitta, calming the fluctuations of the mind, which is called Chitta. And so back to this example. Now, suppose one of these students is like, I don't feel comfortable about this. I think I'm going to say something. So they say something. They're like, I really love this teacher, but something weird is happening, and I'm not really comfortable with it because, this was such a feel-good space, and I really don't understand. Perhaps it's a misunderstanding. And the owner contacts the teacher, who they pay and they employ, and says, hey, let's have a chat. One of your students mentioned something to me. So this is where the ego is a big trap. It is definitely not our higher self, and it does tap into all of our personal triggers. So the owner meets up with his teacher, and the owner is, hey, this came back to me. What say you? So the teacher, that highly regarded and with the highest degrees in yoga, is kind of like, oh. And the ego is like, red alert. We've been caught. How do we get out of this? How do we get out of this? Well, first of all, the ego loves to blame other people. And so the ego goes, well, you know what? It's not my fault. I'm just your employee. I have so many people coming to my yoga class and they love me. So I don't know what you're talking about, and you probably misunderstood. And so this is so the studio owner, the franchise person, or the manager says, well, I did understand clearly, and is there something you want to talk to me about? Something that that's going on? And the ego, the yoga teacher, Zigo, is now saying, oh, the blame game didn't work. Well, maybe I should blame them some more. Or what's even better? I can make myself a victim. So the yoga teacher goes, you know what? I don't know why you're saying this to me. I have always worked here, come here on time, and my students love me. This is the students didn't say anything to me, so this must be all about you, and you're picking on me. This must be personal. See how the conversation flipped? The ego got caught, and then the ego wanted to blame, and then the ego decided that the blame game wasn't working, so it had to turn the teacher into a victim in order to get out of the situation. So that is just another example. One example about the teacher and the doctor and doctors and being humble. And this is another example. I'm going to give one more example one more example. And I've seen it personally actually, I'm going to give two, a general one and a very personal one. So the general one, the yoga teacher sees people in their family and they think, oh my goodness, they don't meditate, they don't go to yoga, they're not as enlightened as I am. So in any argument that they take, or the yoga teacher will fall back on, well, I'm a yoga teacher, I meditate, so regardless of what this conversation is, you're wrong and I'm right. That is the ego. That is the thing that we as yoga people need to be aware of, notice, and reel back on. Okay, we are not better than anyone else. We are seekers on this journey. All yoga teachers are, and all yoga teachers of teachers are. And humility is what keeps us connected to the divine. If we think we're better than, if that thought pops up, it is always something that comes from that part of our mind or chitta that is the ego. So this last example is a personal example. So I have been married for almost 30 years. And in the beginning of my marriage, I was convinced that my husband had an anger problem, the way that he expressed it. And there was nothing that you could say to me to convince me otherwise. Yes, he did express things differently, and perhaps in ways that I was not comfortable with. And I was filled with righteousness, thinking, that's not right. I'm right. And, I do yoga. I read self-help books, sometimes 3, 4 at a time. I read one in paper version, audiobook, whatever. I do meditation. I do teacher training. If I say he has anger problems, then I'm right, and it's his problem. But I would also, every single year, multiple times per year, I would get laryngitis. I couldn't speak. I would break out into horrible rashes at certain times. And then I started, and sometimes after conversations, actually, the tipping point came. We were having a disagreement, and I was upset, and I ran upstairs, and I screamed into my pillow. Something that I had been doing for years, and I realized that I was angry, that he was expressing his anger. However, I was not expressing my anger, but that was also an anger issue that was appearing in my physical body, that I too was angry. And starting from that moment, it was not overnight. Nothing is overnight. Nothing that heals our soul and helps us evolve as spiritual beings happens overnight. But the minute I realized that I too had a thing with anger, and that maybe I need to look into that as well, doesn't excuse his behavior, but it does bring responsibility to myself. Instead of blaming him and rinsing my hands completely of any responsibility in the situation, it made me responsible. my ego was using my spirituality to convince my intellectual mind that I was better than he was, one. Two, that I was a victim. And my subconscious mind and my issues that I had as a child also played into what the ego was telling me. So, really concrete examples here. And this is, I would say, Book 1, Sutra 2, Part 2. If you look at the previous video, there's a themed class about calming the fluctuations of the mind and staying present. One of the ways to do that is to stay present. So before I end this video and check to see if it streamed to 3 locations instead of 2, but 2 is fine as well. One more thing, pretty important thing here about checking in, recognizing when ahamkara is ego is trying to get the upper hand. 1, incessant thoughts. How could this person do this? How blah, 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 blah. I can't believe, I would never. Fully justified, incessant thoughts that won't stop. If your mind is not at peace, your soul is not at peace, and there is something off, and it's probably the ego sneaking its way in there. So that is one way to recognize when our ego is trying to get the upper hand. So there's another way to figure out if the ego is trying to get the upper hand. Our emotions. So our thoughts are saying, yeah, how can they, and I am, and better than, or how, whatever, blame. The thoughts are there. I'm better than, I blame them, or I'm victim, or whatever it is in a situation, to not look at my responsibility in that situation. The other indicator is our emotions. When we feel peaceful, when we feel settled and calm, that is when we are most connected to our highest self, or the divine, or God, whatever you call that, that infinite intelligence. That sensation of peace is an indication that you're on the right path. If the emotions are tempestuous, they are violent and roiling. Like I have this vision of the ocean when there's a storm. Things can get broken, people can get hurt. If the emotions are like that, perhaps that is an indication that the ego is also trying to get its way in there. So 2 big ways for spiritual seekers to think, figure out if our ego is trying to get the upper hand and using all of the learning that we have had so far, that we've gained against us, or in the ego's favor, but not in our mind, our soul's highest interest. Okay? So that is for Sutra 2, Book 1 of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Part 2. There was the video before this has a themed class to help settle the mind and stay in the present moment. Because when we're out of the present moment, that is another way that is another indication that we're not connected to the highest self, or the divine, or infinite intelligence, or the universe. So, and the first 3 sutras in book 1 need to be taken together. The first sutra, if you look back on the video, is about staying in the present moment, that is always a point of empowerment. And then the second sutra, which we spoke about part 2, is when Patanjali defines what yoga is. It's not asana, which is physical yoga. It's not pranayama, which is breath practice. It is calming the fluctuations of the mind. That basically, life is yoga. So signing off now with this recording. If you have any questions, feel free to send us a direct message from Instagram at Westchester Yoga. Please hit the subscribe button. That makes my account a little bit more visible. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.